Welcome to Your Daily Dose, a devotion ministry of the Faith Baptist Church of Franklin and Middletown, Ohio. Thanks for joining us each weekday as we share God's Word with you. It's your daily prescription for all that ails you. And now, Your Daily Dose.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome again. I just said good morning. I don't know when you're watching this. So, good day. That'll work because it doesn't really matter when. Welcome to Your Daily Dose. We're glad to have you with us. Probably should edit that out, but I won't. I was reading the other day, as I was waiting at a doctor's office, Forbes magazine. And Forbes magazine now has Jeff Bezos, I think that's how you say his name, who's the founder of Amazon.com, as the richest man in the world. And I got to reading because it intrigued me just how wealthy he was. I'll tell you how wealthy he is. Last year he finalized a divorce with his now ex-wife, and her inheritance just of his Amazon stock was worth $36 billion. And I'll prep that B, billion dollars. His now new net worth personally is somewhere around $120 billion. I'm sure you feel sorry for the poor fellow, don't you? In all seriousness, no, you could have the wealth of two Jeff Bezos and still not be wealthy. I've often pondered, is it possible to be rich, but in reality still be poor? Well, in Luke chapter 12, we have an example. We have a story of the rich man who was in reality a poor man. In Luke chapter 12, verse 15, Jesus said, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesseth." The word covetousness there is descriptive of a person who always has a thirst for more. The Romans had a proverb years ago. It goes like this: money is like seawater. The more a man drinks, the thirstier he becomes. When we look at our text, we see that Jesus here was instructing us to beware, to guard ourselves, keep ourselves from becoming covetous. He tells us that life is more than merely just our wealth and our possessions. Jesus was trying to tell us that you can have the wealth of a Jeff Bezos, yet you can still be living as a pauper. And to illustrate his point, he began in verse 16, Jesus gave us the parable of a certain rich man. I'm not going to take the time to read the whole thing because I got a lot to say as usual. So first thing we're going to do is take a look at his success. We'll cover it all. We read in verse 16, Jesus spake a parable unto them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully." So it's obvious that the man that Jesus described was someone who was successful not only financially but also materially. And his wealth, no doubt, provided, I'm sure, probably a very luxurious lifestyle. I'm sure he lived in the best of homes. I'm sure he ate the finest food. I'll bet he wore the nicest clothes that money could buy. Anything he wanted was at his fingertips, and if it wasn't, he could go out and acquire it. As we look at the success of the rich man, a couple things that we need to see. First is the riches he enjoyed. Verse 16 tells us that his ground gave forth plentifully. Then it indicates that his ground was probably very fertile and that his crops produced abundantly. In fact, his fields did so well. In verse 17, he said, "I will pull down my barns and build greater," meaning it was going so well for him that he needed bigger barns in which to store his crops. J.D. Rockefeller had three simple rules for anyone who wanted to become rich. First was go to work early. Second was stay at work late. Number three, find oil. In the case of this rich man, his crops were his oil. Interestingly enough, the same article I read from Forbes says that there are now 18.6 million millionaires in the United States. That was at the end of 2019. If there had been a Forbes magazine and there had been a list of the richest men in the world during the times of this rich man, he would have been on the list. He had riches that he enjoyed. He had a retirement also that he was envisioning. We look at verse 19. He tells to us that he had enough goods laid up to last a lifetime. He could take what he had and stretch it out and last until his death. The oil tycoon, since we're talking about Rockefeller a moment ago, J.P. Getty was interviewed one time in London. The reporter said, "If you retired now, would you say that your holdings would be worth $1 billion?" Oh, Getty scratched his chin and said, "Well, I suppose so." But remember, a billion doesn't go as far as it used to. In the case of this rich man, he had done so well that he had enough to last a lifetime. In fact, because he had prospered, we get to hear him say to himself in verse 19, "Take thine ease, eat, drink, be merry." What was he doing? He was thinking to himself, "Hey, look, I've done so well. I don't have to worry about working anymore. I can just retire and sit back and enjoy the rest of my life." From the world's point of view, this man had done very well for himself. But as Jesus taught us in verse 15 there, a man's life does not consist in how much money he has or what he possesses. So we see his success, but then we go on to see his selfishness. Read in verse 20. Jesus called this successful, this prosperous man, a fool. Now let me be quick to say, Jesus did not call the man a fool simply because he was rich. The Bible does not condemn wealth. The Bible does not condemn riches. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10 says, "The love of money is the root of all evil, which while some have coveted after, they've erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." It's not a sin to have money. Rather, it's a sin when money has us. See, that was the case of this rich man. There's nothing here that seems to indicate this man gained his wealth from anything other than hard work and legitimate means. I'm sure he plowed his field, sowed the seed, worked the crops, and did everything he could do, and his crops prospered. There was nothing even wrong with his retiring early because of his good fortune. He's not called a fool here because he was prosperous. It was because of his selfishness. See, the first thing is greed was the master of his life. If you take a look at this rich man, his world was not any bigger than he was. His whole life was centered upon what he had done and his desire to have more. As you read the parable, you'll find him using a lot of personal pronouns. We hear him thinking to himself, "What shall I do? I have no room. I will do this." And then as he works through his thought process, it's I, me, and mine. It's my fruits, my barns, my goods, my soul. His whole life was centered around what he had done, what he had, and what he was going to do. This rich man lived in a world bound on every side by himself. And all he had was a desire to have more. Not only was greed mastering his life, the sad part is that God was missing from his life. At no point do we see this man giving any kind of thanks to God. In fact, God never mentioned at all in any of his plans. There's no talk of God. There's no thought of God. You know what? His God was gold. Why did Jesus call him a fool? It's because he left God out of his life. All he did was live for material things. Let me repeat, there's nothing wrong with having things. There's nothing wrong in having money. But as Jesus said, a man is a fool that lives just for this world, leaves God out of his life. Jim Elliot one time said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." The opposite of that would be he's a fool who takes what he cannot keep to gain that which he will eventually lose. Think about that for a minute. But for many of us, that's how we live our life. God has no part in our life. We seldom think or acknowledge or thank God. We don't leave room in our life for God. Some of those people even call themselves Christians. Well, there's a statement made by G. Gordon Liddy one time. I'm not endorsing anything he ever said or did, but his quote was, "I have found within myself all I need and all I shall ever need. I am a man of great faith, but my faith is in George Gordon Liddy. I have never failed me." There's a lot of people in this world who feel they don't need God. They give him no time. They give him no thought. No doubt that this rich man was the same way. But I'll remind you, Jesus called him a fool. A person is foolish if all they live for is themselves and material things, all the while leaving God out of their life. I ask you, what are you living for? Is the most important thing in your life your vocation or your occupation, some form of recreation? Look, none of those things would ever be interpreted as being wrong. But a person is foolish if that is what they live for and they leave God out of their life. We've seen his success. We see his selfishness. Then we see his short life. I don't doubt that the rich man had enormous plans for his future. But little did he know that his future was limited not to years or months or weeks, but unfortunately, it's down to hours. We read in verse 20, God said unto him, Thou fool, this night shall thy soul be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? I kind of envision the old man as a plantation owner, sitting on the veranda of his big giant house, looking out over his fields, and as he views across the acres and acres of waving grains and plants, and he thinks to himself, hey, look, I've done pretty well for myself. I've earned everything that I need in this world. I can retire early. I'll just spend the rest of my life at leisure. What the rich man didn't know is that before the day was done, death would knock on his door. It's very possible, I would think, that he kept several appointments throughout his day. Yeah, rich people who have money, tend to have a lot of appointments, usually because people want their money or want an investment or something. But there was one appointment that man could not have prepared for. That appointment was with death. The rich man really reminds me of a couple of things. Sadly, first is the brevity of life. I can tell by his words in this passage, he thought that he had years to live. He probably had no reason to doubt that he would not live for many more. I'm sure his health was good. I'm sure he felt good. He had every reason to think he had plenty of time. But in truth, he had only hours. Many people like this rich man live as though death is some far, far away event. They know death is coming, but they don't think of it as something that's about to happen. The other day I was doing something else, and something came about 9/11 and all the people who died that day, and what a horrific event that was. 2,977 people confirmed dead from that incident. How many of those people do you think got up that morning expecting that they weren't going to come home that evening? We never know when it's going to be our last day on earth. Life is, as James described, a vapor that appeareth for a little time, then vanisheth away. So there's a brevity to life, but there's also a priority to life. After giving us this parable, Jesus said in verse 21, So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. See, the rich man focused all on laying up his treasures for himself, but he was never rich, if you will, towards God. He was never even thanked God. When it came to God, when it came to eternal things, he was spiritually bankrupt. Everything but God had become important in his life. He had planned, no doubt, for many things, but the one thing that he failed to plan for was his eternity. I find it interesting. Jesus' words were, This night thy soul shall be required of thee. Now, required is not we wouldn't, if we were going to speak it in today's vernacular, that's not how we would say it. We would say, tonight your soul is going to be called. You're going to die and your soul is going to be reckoned. But the reason I think the word required was used is it actually has a banking connotation. As a banker, if or something is required, that means you're calling in a loan. It's required that it be paid and taken care of. The life of this rich man, you see, was a gift from God. His success, his prosperity had been a gift from God. Everything that he had come from God. It was all a loan from God. And now here we find Jesus about to call in that loan. And you know what? The rich man had nothing to pay it with. So how about you? If your loan from God was called in today, would you be able to pay it? You know what the real truth is? We can't pay it. But I do know someone who did. Elvina Hall, many, many years ago, wrote the words to what is my favorite hymn of all time. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, but he washed it white as snow. Have you ever come to God and truly accepted his gift of salvation? I hope you have this morning. If you haven't, there's no better time than right now to do so. But for the Christian, the question is, are you genuinely living your life for God? Is God the priority of your life? Is God preeminent in your life? See, there is coming a day when this life is going to end. And when that day comes, you know what? We will meet God. And the only thing that's going to matter then is whether or not we are saved, whether or not we served God. You can be certain God's not going to ask how much money you have in your checking account. He's not going to ask how many boats you have. He's not going to check out your portfolio. The only thing that will be asked is whether or not we are saved, whether or not we laid up treasures for ourselves in heaven. Said all that to ask you this question: what are you living for? And what if your soul was required of you tonight? Would you be ready? Would you be found having lived for the Lord? And would you be rich toward God? It's an amazing rat race in which we live today. No doubt. I look around my neighborhood and I see my neighbors, many of whom are just trying to keep up with the guy next to them, finding all of their pleasure in things and wealth and working hard for the flesh, not for God. The question is, what are you living for? If you're a Christian, the only reason you should be living is for Jesus Christ. Every breath that we take should be in service to him. Now, I'm not saying that you have to live like a pauper and that having a job and working, earning income is a bad thing. What I'm saying is that what are we living for? If you're living to get that bank account larger, it's the wrong purpose in life. If you're living to see others accept Christ, if you live to serve Jesus Christ, then that's what we should be living for. And we should not be like that rich man. It's easy to get caught up in those things in life. So I encourage you today, think about who you're living for. And think about whether or not, if you were to die today, how would you be found when we stand before Christ? I don't know about you, but I want to be found as a guy who was laying up treasures in heaven, not simply for myself. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.
This has been Your Daily Dose, a ministry of Faith Baptist Church. Subscribe to our YouTube channel today and click the bell next to the button to sign up for email notifications each time we live stream or release a new video. To learn more about faith, please visit our website, fitinatfaith.com, for more information about our church. Have a great day in the Lord.